Hello there, I'm Gary. Welcome to my channel and welcome back if you've been here before. So today is combo day on the kit of the week. That kit being, of course, the North American F-51D Mustang in 1/48 scale from Airfix. Being combo day, I'll start off with a history of the F-51D. I'll then have a look at the kit itself, its history, the competition out there, and of course what you get in the box for your money. And then finally I'll show you how to put it all together. All these bits come in chapters, so you can hop backwards and forwards as your heart desires. Now if you like the video, and I hope you do, please do remember to say so by clicking the like button, the thumbs up button below. And of course do remember to subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. The link to do that is the small logo down there in the bottom right corner. Click on that. Doesn't cost you a penny, helps me enormously. And for more concrete contribution to the running of the channel, you can click the super thanks button down here, or you can visit Patreon or buy me a coffee. Links to both of those are in the information box below. There's also a link to the Airfix online store. If you click on that and then buy anything at all, Airfix at no extra cost to you will make a donation to this channel. And of course, if you're a member of the Airfix Club, you'll get your 10% online discount as well. Everyone's a winner. Enough of all of that, let's get on and look at the kit of the week, the North American F-51D Mustang. For such an American icon, it is perhaps surprising that the genesis of the Mustang was in an order from the UK. In the late 1930s, Sir Henry Self, on behalf of the UK government, approached North American Aviation to ask if they could produce the Curtiss P-40 under licence, as it was the only US fighter at the time close to European standards. North American's president, Dutch Kindleberger, instead suggested designing a new fighter around the P-40's Allison V1710 engine, a process he said was quicker than building P-40s. Self insisted that North American try to build the Curtiss XP-46 and buy the drawings for it, which they did. However, North American then presented their own design instead. The resulting NA-73X, some might say, bears a strange resemblance to the Curtiss design. Nonetheless, the UK ordered 320 aircraft in March 1940. These were delivered to the Royal Air Force as the Mustang Mark I. With performance that struggled above 15,000 feet, the Mustangs are used mainly as a low-level fighter and in ground attack and reconnaissance roles. The first US order for what was then designated the P-51 was in July 1941, but these were actually destined for the UK under the Lend-Lease Agreement. Originally called the Apache, the British name Mustang was adopted instead. After the attack on Pearl Harbor, interest in new fighters was reborn and the XP-51 was put through trials. In 1942, 1,200 P-51As were ordered, but just 360 were delivered before production instead commenced to the P-51B, and the legend was born. Mating the superb aerodynamics of the P-51 with the high altitude performance of the Rolls-Royce Merlin engine, built under licence by Packard, was inspired. P-51Bs and Cs started arriving in the UK as part of the US 8th Air Force, and they were rapidly adopted as an escort fighter. The Mustang's superb range meant it could escort bombers all the way to Germany and back. Following combat experience, the P-51D series was introduced with a bubble canopy giving an excellent all-round view. With improved wings, an armament of 6 50 caliber machine guns and better underwing stores, the P-51D was the most widely produced of the Mustangs. After the end of the Second World War, the Mustang continued as the standard USAF fighter, although as new jets such as the P-80 and the P-84 arrived, the Mustang was relegated to secondary roles. However, in the Korean War in the early 1950s, the Mustang, now designated F-51, proved itself useful in the ground attack role, as its endurance and range was far greater than the early jets. The main problem was the vulnerability of the Mustang's liquid-cooled engine to ground fire, and F-51s sustained heavy losses. Combat missions were also flown by 77 Squadron Royal Australian Air Force and by No. 2 Squadron South African Air Force, both flying the Mustangs until converting to jets, the Australians to the Meteor and the South Africans to the Sabre. Mustangs continued to serve with Reserve and Air National Guard units through the 1950s, and many were sold overseas. The last known Mustang in military use was retired from the Dominican Air Force in 1984. Large numbers of Mustangs still fly in civilian hands, either as warbirds or as racing aircraft occasionally modified to extremes. This kit's history is brief but varied. It derives from a tooling first released in 2017, the first new tool Mustang in 1/48 from Airfix. There was a previous 1/48 Mustang released by Airfix in 1999, but this was just a reboot of the Otaki kit from 1974. The 2017 new tool was released as the F-51D in 2018, this kit we're building today, and in 2019 there was a release of the Mustang Mark IV and P-51K, as well as later the P-51D with the filletless tail fin. The 2022 release has a new set of decals, and I must say I don't like the look of that checkered noseband. That decal is going to be a tricky thing. The P-51D version of the Mustang is easily available from several companies. Eduard has a 2019 tooling that's already been sold in 10 different boxings, most recently this dual kit of yellow and red tail Mustangs. Hobby Boss has released 3 versions since their very cheap 2012 new tooling. ICM still has 2 versions of its 2002 tooling available. You can certainly still buy the 2014 Italeri kit, but this is just the 1991 Hasegawa kit with a few new parts and decals. The Hasegawa kit has spawned 33 different boxings. Meng Model has 3 versions of their P-51D available from the 2016 new tool, and the Tamiya kit from their 1995 new tool is still available. On the second-hand market, there are dozens of kits available, not just from these, but also from the likes of Revell, from Testers, Fujimi, and many others. The front of the box shows another lovely piece of art by Adam Tooby, this time the P-51 or F-51 in low-level action over Korea. The kit is rated at skill level 2, so it should be achievable by anyone who's made 1 or 2 kits previously. It also comes with a token for 2 flying hours. You can collect these if you're a member of the Airfix Club towards a free kit in the future, or you can donate them to Models for Heroes. A link to this very excellent charity is in the information box below. The lid just slips off the box like so, and then we can see what we get inside. First of all, this quite large bag of bits and pieces and parts. We'll have a closer look at those in just a moment. We also have our Airfix instruction sheet, of course. Again, have a closer look at that in a little while. We have our decal sheet. Lots and lots and lots of decals, stencils, all sorts on there. And finally, we have the sheet to tell us where the stencils all go. So the Swedish one on this side, and the American one on this side, and Australian one actually. Okay, that's what we get in the box. Let's have a closer look at all the bits and pieces. So here's frame A, obviously with the fuselage halves, the upper wing sections, ailerons, drop tank options, rudder, and this is the main part of the body. It's upside down here, goes this way up, so the instruments set, the radios and all that sit on here. This is a cockpit area, and this is a tail wheel area. Frame B, the lower wing section, rudders, or fin rather. These are the cockpit sides, doors, main gear doors, and the underside of the engine. Frame C has the undercarriage bay details, the flaps, the elevators, the pilot, a fillet for between the undercarriage bay and the engine compartment, the wheels up piece, if you're having wheels up, that's a single piece there to cover the undercarriage bay, and of course the propeller. Then frame D, undercarriage pieces, interior pieces, the bombs, the exhaust stacks, the instrument panel, seat back, wheels, undercarriage bits and pieces. Do you know what? It all looks just a little bit soft, a little bit overused, a little bit not as sharp as I was expecting, actually. But I'm sure it's fine. I'm sure it's fine. Then magically frame H, which just looks at A, B, C and D. Now we have frame H, rockets and the propeller, I guess, for this particular variant. And finally frame E, which are the transparencies. So you have windshield, canopy, I guess open and closed, gun sight, identification lamps and bits and pieces. I don't know, we'll see what a lot of this stuff is as we build it. Now the parts, they look okay, but they don't look absolutely crisp. They don't look absolutely sharp. Have a look at this instrument panel here. It's fine. I may well paint this because there's actually quite some detail on there. It's not too bad, but it all just looks just that little bit wishy-washy, just that little bit not quite sharp. I don't know. Maybe it's an optical thing, and I can't see it, but it doesn't look as crisp and clean as some of the other kits I've seen recently, especially at this scale. The fuselage panel lines, they're okay. They're quite deep, but that's the Airfix way of doing things. Makes it much easier to do weathering and whatever. The fuel tanks are fine. Again, it's all fine. It's all okay. It's not just doesn't really shout and scream at you, wow, this is really cool. The plastic looks all right. The rivet holes are nice. I don't know. There's just something about it that just says it's been used a lot. And I have to say, this pilot figure really is not that great. At 1/48th, it's kind of all right. I don't know what he's wearing around his neck. I don't know what all this is. This thing here. I don't know what that is that he's got around his neck. It doesn't appear to be an oxygen mask. I suppose it should be, but it's just not quite there, is it? And again, with the undercarriage bays, they're fine, but they're just not absolutely crisp. Now, whether that's the molds, whether it's the plastic they're using, I don't know, but it just doesn't look absolutely sharp. The instruction booklet is very much of the modern Airfix style. Shaded diagrams, lots of use of spot colour to say where you're going to paint stuff that's different. Of course, the dark orange here is stuff that you've done in a previous step, which is the way they do it nowadays. It's all very clear. Lots of decals and other bits and pieces for the interior of the cockpit, which is fine. Drill points for the stores, for example. Everything looks pretty straightforward on here. And at the back of the instruction sheet are the schemes. The first one here, an aircraft of 57th Fighter Bomber Squadron in South Korea in 1952. Probably the one I'll be doing. Then there's one from the Royal Australian Air Force, also in South Korea, 77th Squadron in 1951. This one's got the big paddle blade propellers on it. And then on the back is the Swedish Air Force from Uppsala in Sweden, 1946, 1st Squadron F-16 wing, the J-26 Mustang. Then there's the then there's the stencil placement sheet. Do you know, not too many stencils. It hasn't gone quite into the post-war insanity of things like the F4 quite yet. There's still quite a lot though, bits and pieces to do. I've noticed this is for the A and B set. The B, which is the Australian aircraft, has a different propeller, so I don't imagine it'd have a lot of these stencils on it. But anyway, there we go. And on the back is the Swedish aircraft, the J-26. I'm guessing a lot of these are probably just in Swedish rather than in English. I don't know. But there we go. Not too much to worry about there. And then finally the decal sheet itself. So up here in this corner here, we have all the common stencils to the A and B aircraft. Here we have the markings for the American 57th Fighter Bomber Squadron aircraft, 77th Squadron, the Australian aircraft here, and then these are for the Swedish aircraft, because remember, a lot of the stencils are changed as well. I do like the Swedish logo though. You can see the decals printed by Cartograph are as excellent as always. The instrument panel actually looks quite good. The propeller logos here, very fine. All the printing is very sharp, very, very good colour. Really, really impressive. And of course it means you can see that indeed a lot of these stencils on the F-16 aircraft are in Swedish. So as usual, first of all I'm spraying some parts, mainly interiors, and with those I'll start with US Interior Green. Starting construction, and the seat is made by adding the seat pan to the back like this. Then the side support goes on. This has the lap strap moulded in as well. The seat can then be positioned on the armour plate back and left to set. The floor of the cockpit is supposed to be natural wood. I've used mahogany here for a touch of luxury. The radio equipment box is painted black. The seat has a leather stitched backing here. The straps are khaki. And this headrest is black. There are two parts of radio boxes to put together. Here you can see this piece is undershot, not sufficiently filled with plastic during the moulding process. Now I do need to fill this in. I use perfect plastic putty for the job. It's very fine grain and you can smooth the edges with water before it sets. Back to the seat, and I'm going to add some black detail wash to bring out the stitching and the edges of the straps. Then I can add a bit of steel to the buckles on the belt. At the back of the radio compartment is this plate which needs to set in first. Once the filler on the radio box is dry, I can sand it smooth with my mini sanding stick, a flat toothpick with a strip of sandpaper attached. When it's done, this can go onto the main radio box. It slots into that plate we just fitted and into two slots towards the front. When it's all dry, of course, I'll paint it black. The seat structure can now go onto the cockpit area, followed by the joystick. Now on that radio compartment I'm going to do a little bit of dry brushing with aluminium paint to make it look scuffed and used, and this helps bring out some of the detail. Talking of detail, onto the instrument panel, which I've decided to paint. First of course black all over, then I'm going to dry brush with white to bring out all the instrument bezels and the edges of the panels. Then with tiny bits of white, add suggestions of instrument dials. You can use the decal as a reference if you wish. Add little bits of colour as you think appropriate. There's a red notice panel at the top, and one of the instruments has quite a lot of yellow in it. When it's all done, the last thing to do is to add a drop of gloss varnish on each instrument dial to look like glass, and I must say I'm really happy with the result. So our finished instrument panel goes onto the rudder bar box, then the whole thing goes into the front of the cockpit tub. Now while that's all settling down, I'll start building the radiator scoop. First I'll paint the insides of them in aluminium. The radiator faces are painted in burnt iron. Now these faces go into one half of the scoop, then the other half joins onto it. There is this carburetor air intake here that has a grill to fit on the front, and this slots onto the top of the scoop. Then the whole assembly sits on the underside of the cockpit piece. Now take note of how it all lines up. Next I'll paint the tail gear leg in interior green and a bit of aluminium before adding a quick wash to the interior of the wheel well. These two pieces become the tail wheel well walls, not something you want to say after a heavy day. One side goes on first, then the tail wheel goes into place, into a slot at the top of the bay and a hole on either side of the well opening near the door. Put the other wall on and the structure is actually really secure. Next onto the cockpit walls, and I'll detail wash them now to see what I've got. Once it's dry, I'll do a bit more dry brushing, this time with a bit of my interior green let down with a touch of white. Just remember, whenever you make shadows, you must always make highlights to give them contrast. With that done, I can add the interior decals. Then there are a few interior bits to add, like this pipe on the starboard wall. Then the throttle quadrant and trim wheel on the port wall. There's this small piece that goes into each side of the nose. I'll drop it into place and secure with a spot of ultra thin cement. I like to make the fin or vertical stabilizer now rather than glue it to each half of the fuselage and then glue the whole lot together. After I've done that, the cockpit wall goes into the port side of the fuselage, followed by the fin. Then the cockpit assembly can go into place. And I must say this all went really well. Then the starboard side of the fuselage joins on and it's held in place with tape and clamps to set. The engine cover can go on too. While that's setting onto the main gear bay, and the rear wall piece just needs to be connected. Then on the lower skin there are holes to be drilled for the stores. I'm using fuel tanks and rockets, so I need 8 holes on each side. They're all 1mm in diameter. That done, I can glue the main gear bay into place. There are 3 identification lamps on the wing. I'll put the transparency in and secure with a tiny drop of ultra thin cement. Don't forget to paint the back with silver or aluminium too. Then the upper wing skins can go on, followed by this insert on each side with the gun barrels. Now I'm using deployed flaps, so they go in next, but not before I've straightened them out. Both were bent quite a lot. Anyway, they straighten out fairly easily, then they slot into the back of the wing with ease. The ailerons slip into the end of the wing as well. Then we have to join the wing to the fuselage, and we slot the rear of the wing in underneath the radiator scoop first, then push down on the front of the wing to get it into place. There is a fillet piece in front of the gear bay, and I'll use some clamps then to hold everything in place while it dries. I found that the fit was generally very good. Now for the propeller mounting, and the propeller shaft slots through this front plate, and a back plate can be glued on. Now if you haven't glued the shaft itself, it will still turn, allowing the propeller to spin later on. The assembly goes into the nose, and an intake fairing, I suspect for an oil cooler, smooths out the chin. There are two pegs inside the radiator outlet depending on the position of the door. The bottom one for when the cooler door is closed, the upper one for when it's open. Just cut off the tab you're not using. The radiator vent door can then go into place. Now while all that's drying, I've still got some other jobs to do. First is to make the tailplanes or horizontal stabilisers, each of which comes in two halves. When they're dry, an elevator fits on the back. The tailplanes can then go either side of the fin or vertical stabiliser, and the rudder goes on the back of that. That all now needs to set up. So in the meantime, I'll do some things like sanding the fins of the rockets, as they have horrible moulding joins on them. I'll also assemble the teardrop fuel tanks. The fins can go on the tails of each rocket, and then I'll start on the aircraft's wheels. These have steel centre rims with rubber black tyres. The propeller assembly itself is simple. First fit the boss to the centre of a propeller. This then goes onto the back plate. Then the spinner goes on top. Now I've no idea why the boss is there, as it can't be seen with the spinner on at all. Maybe some really early Mustangs didn't have spinners, I don't know. Anyway, I'll also fit the bomb racks now as well. They have stabiliser grips on, which is a nice touch. Now the tyres have dried. I'm going to add a very gentle wash of a sandy colour to make them look used. Onwards to the canopy and masking. I'll start with the windshield, and what I do is lay a piece of frog tape or other low tack masking tape. Then I use a cocktail stick really well into the edge of the frame. After that, I can chase around the inside of the edge with a really sharp knife blade. A scalpel's perfect, but do take care, as the one thing scalpel blades are really good at is cutting skin. Within just a few minutes, you'll have the glass masked. For the canopy itself, I tend to mask the edges with a thin tape, then paint the inside with a liquid mask. I'm also going to put some liquid mask on these signal lights. Now you can of course buy a pre-cut mask set with all of this done for you. Remember, don't use your best brushes for the liquid mask, as it will dry into the bristles, and getting it in out will ruin any point the brush may once have had. Maybe I'll try some cheap nylon brushes for this in future. Next comes the instrument combing. This goes in underneath the windshield. I'll use a tiny drop of ultra thin to secure it just at the very front end. Then the gun sight. Now here is an excess moulding that can be cut off, but on the other side you want to go along until you can feel a dent along the sprue feed, and that is where to cut it off. That extra bit sits in this indentation. A tiny dab of glue at the end will secure the sight. I'll paint it black when it's set. Then the windshield as a whole can go into place in the fuselage. It's a really good fit, so just secure with a couple of tiny dabs of ultra thin. As that's drying, I'll add some detail wash and some oil stains to the wheels. The hint of colour of the oil helps break up the bluish steel everywhere. I'm also going to paint the rockets while they're still on the sprue. White body, olive drab warhead, aluminium fins, fuses and launch rails. Now I've blocked off the cockpit with tissue and tape so I can start the paint job. I'm using a 2-part metallic spray system made by Vallejo. First thing to apply is a coat of black gloss primer all over. Then the metallic coat goes on top. I've done the whole plane in aluminium, but the wing panels I'm doing a darker Dural colour. On the instructions, these would be number 11 silver and number 56 aluminium respectively. When it's dry, I can mask off for the anti-glare black nose and the squadron red flashes. Now on the propeller, I've painted it aluminium, but I'm doing black now over the blades. Now when that's dry, I can use a gentle 600 grit sanding stick to just chip the paint off the leading edges to bring out the metal beneath, a kind of eroded look. Now give all the paint time to dry thoroughly, then start adding the decals. This is when I know I'm getting close to the finish and the plane starts to take on its character. Does anything shriek USA more than stars and bars on bare metal? When they're done, I'll add transparent paint to the ID lights. They'll be yellow, green and red. Final build now, and the main gear inner doors joined together like this. Then slot simply into place in the middle of the gear well. There's an actuator arm. One end fits into the spar and the other into the inside of the gear door. Do the same on the other side. Now the main gear leg has a tenon that sits into this slot in the wheel. Now this sets the position of the weighted main flat spot. Make sure you get them the right way round. Then there's a door grip here that fits onto the leg itself. Then the gear door sits in a hole at the top of the leg and against that grip. Once you're happy with it, repeat for the other side. And when all that's drying up, you can fit the tail wheel onto its leg. Next I'll populate the stores, firstly the fuel tanks and then the rockets. And when they're done, the main gear leg neatly sits into a hole in the bay. It is slightly loose, so do check the position constantly as it sets. And while you're waiting, on the canopy there are a couple of structural pieces to fit. For these I'll use a white PVA as they are so close to the transparency I don't want to risk any hazing. Then there's a few finishing touches, this radio mask on the back for example and a pitot tube under the wing. There's also this landing light and that is a real pain to locate into its hole. The propeller goes on. Then the canopy goes on. And finally the exhaust stacks go into the nose. And with that my Mustang is finished. Well, overall it's a beauty. It looks good in this scheme and you know what, it went together pretty well. Now there were a few issues on my one, an undershot part or two, the bent flaps, but these were easy enough to overcome. It has been pointed out to me by my subscriber Brett, well noticed my friend, that there should be some big USAF letters on the wings opposite the stars and bars, and it's a pity they're not there because this would really add to the look. Anyway, the slight lack of sharpness that appeared on the sprue is really not noticeable once the whole kit's gone together. I think overall it's a very decent and very rewarding kit to make. So there we have it, the F-51D Mustang. Now if you've enjoyed the video, and I hope you have, then please do remember to say so by clicking the like button, the thumbs up button below. And if you haven't done so already, please do subscribe to my channel. You do that by clicking on the logo down there in the bottom right. Doesn't cost you anything, helps me enormously. In any case, thank you so much for watching and I will see you next time.